practice, when you switch patients from Gleevec to generic imatinib, have you seen any patients that have lost response or have had problems with different side effects?
Certainly no one who's lost response. We have had, I would say, just a couple of patients who have experienced slightly different side effects. We have switched a little bit between different manufacturers to try and help with that. But for the majority of patients, no difference, and certainly no concerns over loss of response.
Yeah, and I'm very similar as well. I mean, it's early days, obviously, but no changes in response at all. As I alluded to, patients have felt that the taste is just very different, and that has proved difficult. And more sort of upper gastrointestinal stuff, more nausea, I think, has been one of the issues that we've had. We've also had a patient who's newly diagnosed who started on generic imatinib as that was their first drug, their first option, and unfortunately she did not tolerate that well at all, and so we have switched already with that patient. So it's small numbers at the moment out of many patients that have actually switched successfully. So, but we're keeping our eye on it very tightly.
We don't think the roving microphones are working. Can they be turned on? While that's getting turned on, I've got a few questions here, so I'll start with asking one of them. So the first question is, one thing I struggle with is that not knowing what caused the translocation. Is there ongoing research into the causes or any theories or ideas as to what triggers it?
Oh, I'm not a good molecular biologist to answer that. I think it really does remain unknown. We know essentially damage to our DNA is the problem, and that's an inevitable accumulation of being alive, of environmental influences. I'm not personally aware of us being able to key into anything precise that we can pin down. I don't know if you are, Mary.
So we know that radiation exposure can be one potential trigger for chronic myeloid leukemia, and that was discovered after the atomic bomb testing in the 1950s, but that applies to a very small number of patients. For the remaining patients, it's really that they've been unlucky and there's been a sort of random mutation within one of their what are called stem cells, which are the cells within the bone marrow that produce the blood cells. So, Ruth, do you want to? Yeah.
Hi, this is a question for Jo.
I'm Jo.
Oh,
Kate.
sorry. I got you the wrong way around. So you had a graph there where the patient you started on nilotinib. Why was nilotinib the first choice for them? Because imatinib would be for majority of the patients.
Yeah. This was a young patient and a female patient, and we thought they would be looking to start a family. So we were looking to get an early, deep response that would then enable them to come off treatment to start a family. But I agree with you, it's not necessarily conventional, certainly not for many patients, to start on nilotinib.
From what you've said and from my understanding, unless there's a particular concern or mutation, that should be very regular. I'd be interested in your view on whether there are any scenarios where that is merited on more of an ongoing basis.
Very occasionally, I think. So overall, we do still tend to recommend a bone marrow diagnosis to give us the maximum amount of information, and also to look at the other chromosomes, not just for the Philadelphia chromosome. So we do tend to recommend a bone marrow diagnosis. But then if the blood results of PCR are tracking down nicely and meeting milestones, then not necessarily ever another bone marrow again. So the times at which I do then come in with them is if people aren't obtaining MMR. So I want to know in that situation whether we've succeeded in getting a cytogenetic response. So for people who aren't getting into MMR, then definitely a bone marrow, partly to check on the Philadelphia chromosome, partly to check for mutations in a more sensitive manner, and also to see, as I mentioned just now, about any other chromosomal abnormalities that might be happening alongside, because a more unstable bone marrow would then worry me. So if I did find an additional chromosome abnormality, that might trigger me to perhaps do another bone marrow a year later to see if it was still present. This is very small numbers of cases, but in the majority we have been able to put the needles to one side for the bone marrows and predominantly rely on the blood.
I think there's another question towards the middle of the room. The lady in the orange jacket.
Just a question for Kate. You mentioned at the start that we are now starting to talk about cures for CML, and I just wondered if you were able to elaborate at all on that.
I think we'll hear a lot more about that this afternoon when we're talking about stopping treatment. But we all have different definitions. We're going back to talking about words again. And I think cure to a lot of people means they've taken the treatment, they've stopped the treatment, and it's either gone away or they don't need treatment anymore. That's one way of defining it. It may be that these tiny traces of CML are still present, and perhaps it's our immune system that's controlling them rather than the drug. We'll hear a lot more about it. But the concept, I think, now that is new with CML, we used to have the constant mantra, you're going to be taking this medication lifelong, and now we're talking about a period on medication that may finish. I think the concept of a curable disorder sort of comes into play there.